Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our new building. I'll tell you a little bit about that, but hopefully you found us okay and on the first try, or the second. So, my name is Maria Emanuel. I'm the Associate Director of UNHInnovation, and we're really glad to have you join us for, I think this is our fourth seminar of our series this year. So as many of you know, our goal for this series is to create a community where innovators and entrepreneurs and like-minded individuals can come together, learn about different topics, and then find a chance to connect with each other as well. So this is a new location for our seminar, as I just indicated, and we're excited to have you here. There will be a formal open house, really celebrating the new building in April, and that's going to be on April 19th, but you get the sneak preview for the next few months. So right now, with this move, we are now co-located. UNHInnovation is now co-located with our interoperability laboratory, with the Connectivity Research Center. We have Greg and Chris from that group, as well as Alpha Loft. And so our seminar next month, to give you a preview of what's coming, will be on Thursday, February 25th, and the topic is going to be entrepreneurship at UNH. So we'll have Andrew Earle, who's a faculty member at the Paul Business School, come and talk about academic and research initiatives related to entrepreneurship. And then Ian Grant, who'll be joining us shortly, and is the new director of the Peter T. Paul Entrepreneurship Center at UNH. He will come and talk about what he has going on with the center and what some of his goals are. And in March, we're going to be talking about crowdfunding, and then we're going to cap off the series in April to celebrate the year with the open house. So a couple of kind of housekeeping items. I wanted to thank our sponsors for our seminar series this year. We have Upton & Hatfield, which is a law firm providing legal services to people, businesses, municipalities in New Hampshire, and Finch & Maloney, based in Manchester, which is an IP boutique law firm. So there's a networking session immediately after we have our seminar portion. It's going to be right through that door. Just a note, please feel free to help yourself to water or to beverages or snacks throughout. That door is going to lock at 5. And so if you get locked out, knock. Or you can just go around, come in the door where you came in after you getting your name tag, and then we will open that. There's a fan that blows right outside that door, so we're going to keep it closed until the seminar is over. But please stay and join us, and we can continue the discussion that we started during the seminar. And if you are not over 21, please enjoy the water and not the beer or the wine. Snacks for everybody, though. So today's seminar, our topic is using interactive performance as a tool for leadership and management development. And our speakers tonight are David Kaye and Jonathan Kipp and Elaine St. Jean. And Jonathan is an operations manager at PrimeX, and Elaine St. Jean is the education and training program coordinator. They're out of Concord, New Hampshire. So PrimeX, and I'm going to read this because I always get the title portions wrong, is a public entity risk pool, and it works with many of New Hampshire's municipalities and schools and other government entities and counties as well. And they've had an interest in experiential learning programs for both PrimeX as well as its clients that think about how to induce behavior changes. And that interest eventually, as I understand it, led to a partnership with David Kaye. And David is the chair of the UNH Theater and Dance Department, and he's a founder of a professional theater company called Play that specializes in interactive performance on, as a training and development tool, and has created performance models for a range of different clients on a range of different issues as well. So one question for the two of you. Would you like questions during the seminar, or should we wait until the end of the presentation portion?
I think we sort of planned it that maybe after we kind of talk a little bit about what we've done.
Okay, so we will make sure that we leave time at the end for a Q&A period, and again, hopefully we'll continue that conversation when we have our networking. So without further ado, I believe I turn it over to you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. It was really a delight for both Elaine and I to come and take part in this. When we first kind of came up, we were both trying to figure out exactly what this was all about and how we could contribute to it. But because this is ultimately about ideas and where ideas lead, it really is kind of a perfect situation. And we'll talk a little bit more about exactly how we kind of came together and how the work that Elaine and PrimeX was doing over in Concord, and the work that we were starting to engage in at UNH, how we found each other, and then how that's really blossomed into a lot of really wonderful, interesting, and innovative ideas. So first of all, let me just talk, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about Power Play and what it is that we do, a little bit about the journey into its inception, and then I'm going to kind of turn it over to Eileen, and she'll pick up the ball and talk about PrimeX and how we've all managed to bring these things together. So first of all, whoops, I always forget it's that way. Right. So first of all, Power Play would fall under the category that we call applied theater. Now, applied theater, its very rough definition is theater and theater pedagogy as applied to things outside of the realms of traditional performance. So it's not about, doing a, here's your audience, here's your play, the play's performed, the audience applauds, and everybody goes home. It's not about that. And there's a huge wide range of things that follow under applied theater. My first exposure to it was all the way back when I was an undergrad at Emerson College, and a director was using psychodrama. I had never heard of psychodrama before. And psychodrama was founded by a guy named Jacob Marino in Vienna around the turn of the century. And it really was a first attempt to create role play as a way of experiential therapy. And as time went on, I became more and more involved using psychodrama and collaborating with psychodrama therapists. I wasn't using necessarily in a therapy because I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I was actually using it as a tool to help playwrights develop plays, actors develop characters. But I was working alongside and actually partnered with a number of psychotherapists. And through this, I gained more and more interest in using theater in other ways other than just performance. Sort of my next step on that was being exposed to the work of Augusto Boal. Boal was a Brazilian theater artist back in the 50s. He was running a very large theater company there, kind of like the Huntington Theater in Boston, or ART. The juntas came in. He had been getting sort of progressively more political. Juntas don't like things like that, so they took his theater away. But he was still very interested in having an impact and particularly confronting the political situation that he was dealing with. So he started to create types of theater that were not traditional. For instance, he got a bunch of his actors together, and they wanted to do a piece that dealt with the crazy things that were happening with the economy and the prices that were so much in line with the way the government was running the economy. So they would go into a supermarket, and they'd have an actor get all this food, and the actor would go up to the counter, and the person would check him out, and then they would say, well, I don't actually have any money to pay for this. And certain actors were there that had various lines, but what they did is they sucked up all the other people that were in the supermarket who had no idea that they were now in a play about prices, a play about the economy, a play about the junta, and then they'd get out of there before the guys with machine guns would show up. So Boal continued to develop this type of work, eventually started to create something called forum theater, which was a real big step in the interactive theater model, where they would take a situation that a community was dealing with, they would come up and present in maybe a 4 to 5 minute play, something that ended with a totally unsatisfactory conclusion. And then they would go to the audience and say, all right, how do we deal with this situation? And he would coax people from the audience to come up and kick out the actors that were sort of the protagonists and let them take over the role and try out what they might be able to do to confront these very difficult situations. And Boal referred to this as a rehearsal for the future. And that really has become a core kind of perception in what we've started to develop. Different ways that we can create rehearsals for the future in any number of capacities and under different types of circumstances. So flashing ahead over many years, continuing to work with Boal's type of work, with psychodramatic type of work, and somewhere along the lines, I guess maybe it was just an epiphany on my part. I had sat through yet another PowerPoint presentation on something like leadership, and I was just about ready to lose my mind. And so there's got to be a better way to learn than somebody saying, all right, here's point A, B, C, and D. You've now learned points A, B, C, D because I just told you. You can write it on your little survey that I learned about it. And now you're good to go out there and lead. And I've always felt that was really limited at best. And through my work with psychodrama and the Boal work, what I was really starting to come into realization is that, so much of what we have to deal with, it lives within the realms of human beings and in the very, very messy world of relationships. And the more I thought about it, I said, well, what does theater do? Theater does nothing but delve into the messy world of relationships. Every play that's ever been written is ultimately about relationships. And what happens when human being A comes up against human being B and all hell breaks loose? So I started to think more and more about why am I not using theater in a more active way to help people develop the things that they want to do, especially when they've got to deal with other human beings. The other part of that is they're saying that ultimately, for me anyway, the most powerful way of learning is through experience. So the applied theater work that I've been doing is all about experiential learning, trying to create and simulate a situation as authentically as we possibly can to engage an audience as actively as we can so that they can really experience and reflect upon their own lives and see themselves in the various scenarios that we start to work with. And that's really what led to the very beginnings of Power Play. Actually, the very first, it really sort of started after some conversations with Ruth Werner, who's a scientist, and she's about ready to become the director of ESOS. But she had an ADVANCE grant. ADVANCE is a National Science Foundation initiative to try to bring more women into the sciences. And she wanted to find a way to let scientists, particularly women scientists, learn how to communicate better. She said, we sit there and we're in our labs, and we do really well in our labs when we're doing our own thing, but then all of a sudden when we got to actually talk to each other, things don't go so well. So we started to think about how can we tackle that one specific problem, communication among scientists. From there, there was another group, a group in Michigan, under the University of Michigan's Center for Learning and Teaching, that I knew very about, a guy named Jeffrey Steiger, who I had known because we served on a committee on interactive theater for the Theater and Higher Education Association. And I was very aware of his work, and his work was going down that path. So we were able to bring his group in under this advanced grant so I could kind of show the people at UNH, this is kind of the thing I've been thinking about and I want to go further with. Fast forward ahead, Chris Shea, who was at that point an associate dean with Paul College, wanted to do a big seminar for women in corporate America. At this point, I was thinking of doing work primarily with student actors, and when she said, could you do, she'd been hearing me talk about this interactive theater thing, could you do something for us, because we're going to be working with these corporate women sort of mid-career. And I said, that's great, but I'm not going to be able to get a 20-year-old woman to authentically promote themselves as a mid-career corporate woman. So I'm going to have to do this with professional actors. She was excited, I was excited. The conference never happened. They didn't get enough participants. But the ball was rolling that much more. The next step was going to the Carsey, at the time it was the Carsey Institute, now the Carsey School. I was just doing a seminar on the state of democracy in rural America. And I just, it happened to be an interest of mine, so I showed up there, and I'm watching this. And I kind of left with one takeaway, and it seemed to be that when in rural America, where we're really using public meetings and town meetings, when it's well facilitated, democracy works really well, and when it's not well facilitated, democracy does not work so well. And so I went to Bruce Mallory, who was at that time the interim director of the Carsey Institute, and I said, what would you think about me creating an interactive theater model to help develop facilitators of public meetings? And that's where the first seed money came. And that was actually the very first project that we had. And since then, we've developed a couple of different models specifically for the Carsey Institute. So in this case, that very first one we did is that we created, actually it was more for New Hampshire Listen specifically. So we had, we created a scenario where a town was confronted with an issue. There was some vacant lots in town that were going to require some rezoning. There were several proposals, and the town was trying to figure out what to do. And so they had brought in a group, something like New Hampshire Listens, to help facilitate this, have listening sessions, and make recommendations to the town council of what the town wanted to do to move forward. So we had 6 participants that were drawn from research of various people that New Hampshire Listen tends to show up at these things, including several people that love to go and disrupt these meetings, as well as people that have brought other elements to it. For instance, one character that, without being really conscious of it, was sort of introducing rather racist thought into the discussion. And one of the questions was, how does a facilitator deal with that if you're hearing something that you feel on some level you need to address, but you're not sure how? How do you deal with this person whose real purpose is to try to disrupt the meeting? What do you do when the person pulls out the camera and wants to start to record? What do you do when you discover that somebody in the group is armed? These are all things that these folks have dealt with. Then of course we had our faux facilitator, our actor facilitator, who of course was not the best facilitator in the world. There were various mistakes that our facilitator made. So the scene would go on, and I would stop the scene at various points and give the opportunity for our audience to actually ask questions of the various actors who are going to stay in character. And each question that they asked could be asked in 2 different ways. They could ask it publicly, that means everybody there could actually hear them, or privately, that is to say it's a one-on-one conversation with the character and the audience. The other people can't hear. Because you can imagine sometimes you would answer questions very, very differently if everybody can hear you that's around you and has a stake in what it is that you have to say. Now also with our facilitator character, everybody's sort of reflecting upon themselves as facilitators. Our audiences were obviously people that want to facilitate. Thinking about themselves as facilitators, looking and examining where this facilitator went well, when things didn't go so well. And then they would start to coach our facilitator, or better yet, I would go into the audience and somebody would have a great suggestion. I say, that's such a great suggestion. Do you want to see how that might play out? How about you come up and try it? And then we would get people from the audience. We would take our actor facilitator out. I've got all of my actors trained to really authentically make it as difficult as possible for this tactic to work, so we can really see what would we be up against, what would be the 3 or 4 objections to this one attempt. So a lot of times these attempts didn't work. Other times they worked part of the way. Sometimes they worked brilliantly. Our actors really couldn't find a way around it. But their job was to make it as hard and realistic as possible. So our audience had a chance to try things out. Our audience got a chance, if they were a little timid, to just coach. It worked in many different capacities. After the Carsey Institute, we then started to work with Advance, this NSF grant that kind of started the whole thing rolling. And from there, we developed an interactive theater model that dealt with equitable hiring practices. So here we had a committee that was out to hire somebody, and there were a number of elements that we infused into this. And for instance, there was a degree of gender bias. The candidate is who we don't see in the scene happens to be a minority candidate, and we can tell that with some of the people on the committee that there is some sort of underlying bias in that level as well. Issues of change, issues of what the actual culture of the department comes up. And it asked the audience to confront a number of questions about their own departments. What is the culture of our department? What is the climate of our department? I sometimes relate these 2 questions back to, again, to theater and characters. I think of culture sometimes as the same way as I think about how we are developed if we were a character. That is to say, we're really the product of our past experience. We're the product of the environment that we grew up in, the economic environment, the political environment, the social environment, perhaps the religious environment. And all of these things have come together to kind of create the core of our being. And that core is somewhat steady and unshakable. I mean, it can change, but it changes very, very slowly, especially the older we get. I don't know if anybody can remember back to when you were like 20 years old. Some of you are not quite there yet. The rest of us are there and perhaps way past. You think back, like when you were 20 years old, you could look back 6 months and go, oh my God, I was such a different person. And you may notice that as time goes on, you have to go back decades before you can use that statement. So to say, and we don't, you don't necessarily think about these things. It's who you are. Well, ultimately, in this case, we were looking at a department, but one can be looking at an academic department, a business department, any type of department. It has developed a culture. It has developed a way of being that in a lot of ways it's no longer conscious of because it's just part of who you are. What this program tries to do is ask us to look at how did we get here? How has this culture ultimately established itself? And what is it that we want to nurture and continue? And what aspects of our culture are getting in the way of where we want to go as a department, as a business, as an entity? So these programs have continued to develop. We've gone through a, oops, right. Oh, that's my inception slide. Sorry, I meant to go past that. And so since then, we have moved on to a number of different projects. New Hampshire Listens in the Carsey School. We also deal with role play work. Some of our first work was with the UNH Master's Program. We also go with the nursing department. Here's where we train actors to go in and actually do an interaction one-on-one with another person. We'll see a version of that very soon. One of the reasons that this has come up is that I don't know if you've ever been subjected to role play in some sort of seminar that you've been in. And this came about because the person that runs the master's program, Mary Bonnock, was very disappointed because she was using role play in her master's program, and it was failing time and time again. The problem was that you had your the social worker students. They knew their role if they were playing the social worker, but if they're trying to play a 19-year-old girl who's pregnant and has no support at home and doesn't know what to do next, all of a sudden they're having to play a role that they don't know anything about. So in this instance, we're able to train actors very specifically to act the roles that come from a true life case study, and in addition to that, build a backstory and do their number one thing, which is to create objectives, or obstacles I should say, that the social worker ultimately has to overcome. For instance, one of the things that we do is they would meet the social workers over a period of 3 weeks, once a week. And over that week, the actor would invent things that would have happened over the course of that week and would make decisions on what they would reveal and what they wouldn't reveal. And it was up to the social worker who was being observed in these interactions to be able to try to get at what was going on with that individual. Eventually, these things would be revealed, and you could see where the social worker was too quick to make a decision or dismiss or not see a path that she really or he needed to go down in order to learn more about what was happening with that client. For Easter Seals, we developed a program for their sexual harassment prevention program. And that was one again where we developed a full scenario, essentially a trigger play, where we saw things sort of develop over a course of time and an interaction with our audiences, starting with just what do we even mean by sexual harassment, because there was not an agreement on that. What these programs do is it really gives us a chance to dig into very, very difficult dialogues in a very, very safe environment. We've done a number of things for the National Science Foundation. In addition to Advance, we've recently done a couple of programs for EPSCoR, which I can't even tell you what EPSCoR stands for. It's one of those acronyms that's really stretching it. But they got it to make it sound like a word.
Maria knows.
Oh, thank you. I probably shouldn't have gone about that the way I just did. But we did 2 programs for them. One was helping scientists better communicate aspects of climate change to a non-science audience. And then we did another program for them to help scientists better collaborate. And I won't go into all the details of that, but again, both, we'll just say quickly, the one to help communicate is we created a scenario where our audience was going to time travel 100 years into the future. And we had, and the basic premise is what policy decisions are being made in New Hampshire now, and what might be the effect 100 years from now if we could project that the thinking of New Hampshire stayed the same. And so we'd say, okay, pretend you're going to imagine that you're behind two-way glass, and you're going to get to eavesdrop on a conversation of these people 100 years in the future. And then we're going to take the glass down, and you're going to have the opportunity to ask them questions. And that's ultimately how that interactive model developed. We've been working for a number of companies and institutions around the country, including University of Virginia, Stevens Institute of Technology, and several others. And ultimately, what has been one of the most rewarding collaborations has been our collaborations with PrimeX. And I will now turn it over to Lane to pick up the ball.
Thank you, David. That's literally a tough act to follow. I As
Just
I'm
talk
watching this,
fast.
I'm going, I should have gone first. Okay. Maria just did a little bit of introduction about PrimeX and who we are and what we do. And we're kind of a weird duck in a little way, so I'm going to try to tell you the layman's version of what a PrimeX is. We're in Concord. We're a public entity risk pool. And really what that means is we're kind of an insurance company for the public sector entities in the state of New Hampshire. So police departments, fire departments, school districts, counties, the county jails, those sort of things. And so what we do is we provide their insurance coverage for, workers' comp, property and liability, and unemployment compensation. My role as the education and training program coordinator is basically training. So the kind of training we do ranges from chainsaw safety to leadership and everything in between. We do a lot of harassment, prevention training, bullying prevention, slips, trips, and falls, all of that kind of stuff. But we also get into more of the soft skills and that sort of thing, conflict resolution and that stuff. So that's kind of who we are and what we do. How this really kind of started in my brain is I was a graduate student at one of your sister institutions at Granite State College, and my capstone project, my undergrad is in organizational development, my master's is in leadership, and I was trying to basically tie the two together. So I started thinking about leadership. David mentioned, going to those leadership trainings and you're sitting through PowerPoint. And we've all been to those. We've been to those conferences and things like that. And we get fired up and we got all our notes and everything. And we leave there and we do everything exactly the same as we always have. Mm-hmm. We've not done anything to change our behavior or anybody's behavior. And I would get so frustrated with that I decided to do a research project on it. So my master's thesis was on simulation and authentic practice in leadership development, a study in effectiveness and design. And so from there, I started learning about the effectiveness of simulation. Now, one of the things that I found out in my research is that the majority of people that are promoted to leadership are promoted not because that they're good leaders. It's because they're really good at something that they do. They're good at what they do, their technical expertise. The problem, though, is that 28% of these promotions fail. And they don't fail because they're not doing their technical jobs right. They fail because they're not doing their leadership things right. Their 88% are deficient in interpersonal skills. That's huge. So that was actually the impetus for where I started going with this. The other thing that was really kind of intriguing was this particular piece of data. 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every day and will do so for the next 18 years. If you let that sink in for a moment, that's amazing. There's this, what this called, they call it the Silver Tsunami, this major exodus of people leaving the workforce. And with them are all of these positions of leadership. The Gen X generation, after these baby boomers, is a very small in number. They're called the sandwich generation, very small in numbers. And so you've got all of these people that have left the workforce, a very large, baby boomers, right? There's lots and lots of them leaving. You've got a very small generation trying to fill those leadership positions, and there's not enough. So we look to our millennials to fill those leadership positions, and are they ready? Only 62% of the people that are promoted into leadership or supervisory positions feel ready. That's not good enough. So that's where I started going. Simulation is not new. The military has been using it for many, many years. But yet, what we choose to do when we're doing our leadership training is stick 1,000 people in a room and give them a PowerPoint presentation, and like David said, send them on their way and say, go ahead, go forth and lead. So it was really frustrating to me. When I had the opportunity to speak to the PrimeX Board of Trustees, one of the things that I said to them was, have you or will you have a 16-year-old that's about to get their license. Anybody in this room have that? Either, okay? So think about that. So think about a young, 15-year-old about, all right, and you say, okay, we're going to send you away for 2 days to a conference on how to learn to drive conference. You're going to sit in a room and have a PowerPoint for those 2 days, and then we're going to give you the keys and your license, and off you go. That's not going to work. But yet we do that with our leaders. We say, here you go to this leadership conference. Now, do it, right? It's the same thing. You're setting them up to fail. So what I wanted to do is try to find a way that helped them practice in a safe environment the leadership skills that they needed so that they went back to their workforce. When they encountered a situation, they could draw upon the experience that they had in the training to help them succeed. So it was strictly circumstantial. Michelle from New Hampshire Listen was having a meeting with Ty Gagne, who was our CEO. Ty invited me in and he said, I want you to hear what she has to say. And so we were talking about facilitating public meetings. So as we work with the public sector, we were talking about this. And so we were having this conversation about how we could potentially use New Hampshire Listens and this facilitation lab, how to do public meetings, to do, help our public sector members. And as I'm sitting there, she goes, oh yeah, so we're working with this group called Powerplay. It's an interactive, and she's kind of giving me the layman's terms, and I have to say I'm passionate about theater. I've done some community theater, and of course she said theater, and my little antenna went up. And she started saying, oh yeah, and these actors help us do this training. I went, really? And that was actually the impetus of the conversation. I got in touch with David, got to see him rehearsing for that, what was it?
That was for the Equitable Hiring.
Equitable Hiring, and it was here at UNH, and I got to sit in the back and just watch them rehearse. And I went, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I need to have this. Brought it back to PrimeX. This is actually at PrimeX. This is a session that they did at PrimeX on the facilitation, how to facilitate a public session. So that was kind of the start. We started having these conversations, and I'm thinking, gee, this is kind of interesting. We do some training for law enforcement. This is our forced options simulator. It basically teaches law enforcement about decision making. So, basically they're interacting with a perpetrator. What are my force options? Can I de-escalate the situation and all of that? So we had this particular simulator for about a year or so, and I was fascinated by the technology. It's a branching technology, and you can actually shoot at the screen if you had to, and the perpetrator would actually respond, and you'll get to see that in a minute. So I was looking at that technology and then having the conversation with David, and I'm thinking, my gosh, could we repurpose this simulation technology for regular leadership, management, supervisory skill training? So we started having this conversation, and it started with a program that we developed at PrimeX on our emerging leaders. It's actually now going into its third year. This is our first graduating class, so I had to give them a little love here. But in this, we have an entire session on conflict resolution. So the instructor comes in and talks about the Thomas Kilmann model about the different kinds of conflict. I'm an avoider, I'm a competitor, I'm a this, I'm a that. You do this assessment, but then we wanted to give them the opportunity to practice in a situation their conflict skills. So what we did is we brought David and his group in, and there were 14 people in the class, and we had the live actors sit in an office with them. We gave the actors the scenario, and they had to respond as the leader in the organization using their conflict resolution skills. So we're using live actors in this situation in a one-on-one, and they had to do it. And it was really intense. They had 4 scenarios that they went through. So basically, we were rotating the actors through. They were doing 4 different scenarios with all of the different people in the class. If I could say, after the class, the reflection piece is the most important part. the reflection is where the learning takes place. So they come out of this situation and they maybe didn't handle it so well. We send them back into a room and they do a reflection. They say, okay, I pulled out, my natural conflict style and I really should have did this. Go back in and try it again. So they went back in and tried it again, came back out, reflected. And so what was really interesting to them was that we put them in situations that were real. We had them sitting in an office. We had people coming in and yelling at them, giving them situations that they had to deal with as a leader. It's a safe environment. We said, go ahead, try it. It's okay to make a mistake because we're going to learn from it. On a side note, David's actors would say, this is great, this is like acting on crack, because they just kept going and going and going. Okay. But it was like 4 hours of just like, interactive improv training and stuff like that. But when the class came back, they were exhausted, first of all, at the end of the day. And we just anecdotal, because it was the first time we've done it. We said, how did that go? And the woman said, that was awful. Thank you very much. Because I've never had the opportunity to practice before. I've never had the opportunity for those skills before. So that's kind of how it started. So then we said, how can we take the live acting thing? Because you know what? We don't have a lot of money, and we're training public sector people. How can I get these actors in every time as much as I would love to? I can't. So what we decided to do is film, okay? We decided to film these scenarios. So we took the filming and we put it into that use of force options simulation software, which isn't made for that, by the way, so we kind of are making it work. But we're having a lot of fun with it. And now we're actually using this kind of stuff in our brand new facility. Oh, David wanted me to show you this picture. This is what the branching looks like. So when we think of a scenario, the branching that has to happen in these simulations kind of looks like this. And so that's kind of what we had to film. So when you think about all of the things, oh, well, what I would say in that situation is this. So you'd say, okay, it goes that way. But if I said this, it would go this way. So we have to film all of those different branches, and you'll get to see that in a minute, as to why that is. So we've had to work with this, and we've actually have gotten better at it as we're starting to film. We filmed a few the first time, and we're trying to find it. But then we're saying, oh, okay, we get it now. And so we've it's evolved. It's very organic. And when the actors rehearse, we actually hear, oh, we didn't actually think of that branch. Let's add that. So we'll film that. So we've evolved over the past couple of years on how this all works. They've also been able to do just what we call fishbowl films for us that are basically training films. So let's say we're talking about FMLA. You are a room full of HR directors, and we're going to now do a training on FMLA. And so we have this video that plays out that has a bunch of errors in it. So as the woman is trying to explain FMLA to Jim over here, he's obviously very confused. And it's up to the HR directors to find all of the mistakes in the video. And then they go back and we say, okay, what should she have done differently, and that sort of thing. So we've done that. We also have a conducting interviews, how not to conduct an interview video that we kind of basically work the same way. So those are more like scenes that we watch as opposed to interactive. So we've done a couple of things. We've taken advantage of them as much as we can. Then we've also filmed some things recently for our force options simulator based on the stuff that's going on with law enforcement right now. So we've been able to kind of really take stuff that's happening in the news, it's current, it's relevant, and we've been able to use the actors to come in and really help our officers make good decisions. So our motto, so to speak, is we want it to be safe enough to prevent harm. We don't want you to get hurt while you're doing this, but we want it to be real enough so that it promotes learning. That's kind of our motto as we go forward. Oh, what happened to our logo got funky here. Sorry about that. Oh, well, anyway. As a result of this, our CEO, his name is Ty Gagney, and he is a visionary, and he allowed us to create a space within PrimeX that is now, it's called the Foundry, and it's an experiential learning center, and basically what it is, it's for all of these kinds of things. There's cameras and control rooms and things like that, so everything that happens in the Foundry, when you think about what a Foundry does, is that you take that metal, you apply heat, and you make it into something else. We're applying that pressure, and we're hoping to give people the tools they need when they leave. So this is what the space looks like. It's different than a regular classroom, like you saw where David and his group were kind of doing that session. It looks a little bit different. Everything's on wheels, everything moves. This is actually one of the spaces that we do training in. We just did a de-escalating aggressive human behavior in this session. You can see this right here is like a little area simulating a desk, say like in a town hall. And we had residents coming in complaining about their tax bills and things like that. And they had to de-escalate the situation. This is one of the classrooms. It basically divides into 3 different simulation rooms. You can see up in the corner, there's cameras and microphones, because the key is we play it back. We do the debrief. That's where the reflection takes place. Not so much even the doing, it's watching how I do it, because most of the time what happens is people say, well, I said this. We go, no, you didn't. And then we play it back and they go, oh, look at my body language. Look at what I was saying. Look at how, helping them see what they actually said. So this is actually one of the control rooms. It's behind that two-way glass. So it's going on in there. We set the rooms up. So if it's an office setting, we set it up as an office so that it feels, we have the telephone there, we have the stapler and all of that stuff. So we try to make it as real as possible. We also, because we do a lot of training for our public works and things like that, we have an industrial lab that teaches them about confined space entry and ladder safety and things like that. So we also have an industrial lab that's actually very cool as well. This is the new force options simulator room. You can see we have a driving thing here, so you can drive to the scene, you get a call. You're an officer, you get a call, you get into your cruiser, you drive to the scene, all sorts of things are coming in. You have to go through an intersection and it's coming at you. When you get there, you actually step out and you start interacting with the perpetrator on the screen, and it's actually interactive. So they're, again, able, in a debriefing situation, seeing did they pepper spray, did they tase, were they able to de-escalate, and they were actually able to see all of that happen. Okay, that's the Foundry. So now I'm just going to show you, I'm going to let Jonathan cue up a video so you get a little sense on what the Foundry is about.
What I'm going to do is just walk you around and give you the front of the house and the back of the house tour so you get familiar with the layout.
Over my shoulder, you'll see some activity. That's our member advisory council in-house today, and they're going to be experiencing the Foundry firsthand.
Today, though, it was primarily to introduce them to the capabilities and the functionality of the Foundry, which is our new training space, and to let them experience what our members will be going through, and then to solicit their feedback.
Our hope for the Foundry is that this really becomes a staple of our education and training here.
Although you might not fall, if someone's working below you, you don't want to drop your drill on them. So there's a lanyard for that if you're working above.
Now that the Foundry has opened up, I'll be sending my department heads, particularly my police chief and my public works director, to come here to participate in the variety of programs.
There are so many opportunities for us to bring different staff at all different levels, from administrative to frontline staff. This is a great opportunity to come here, utilize some of those skill sets, and improve upon them.
You have to make decisions at the spur of the moment, and then you get to analyze your decision making. So I think it's a great tool to use for training.
Registered owner of the vehicle car 2 has is wanted out of Portsmouth for armed robbery.
Yeah, show me her.
The goals leading into 2016 are to get as many members through training here from all different types of employment, whether it be educational folks, county, municipal, We want them to be able to experience what we're doing, primarily though from a risk management perspective.
Interactive training is not new, and that's why we do it. The decisions that you would make without those stressors are different than the decisions you would make with those stressors. Who do you need to talk to? Put that down. Put the gun down.
It's clearly, to me, state of the art. It's very comforting, it's very clean, and it'll provide the training and the level of service to raise the bar for all of my department heads.
I think it's wonderful. It puts the person right there at the time that it's happening. You actually believe you're part of the process.
We don't always have an opportunity to have a do-over and get it right.
I thought the taser was the instrument to use, and not deadly force.
Okay. It's very different, and it's vitally important. So the Foundry, in my view, is a tremendous asset for our membership, and we should look forward to utilizing it extensively as we go into the future, because it is for the greater good.
We're just really psyched to have this opportunity to work with the Member Advisory Council today, and we can't wait to see members in action at the Foundry and wherever we're doing experiential learning types of training throughout the state.
So what we're going to do now is actually have you see one of the simulations that we used David's actors for, that we filmed and put into our use of force options software, and now we use it for conflict management. So let's try it. So what would, this situation's a little bit different. Pretend that this is my office, and it would be set up like an office if we were doing the actual training. There would also be a facilitator. So in this case, for the conflict, it would have been the instructor for the conflict resolution. She'd be standing over to the side, watching me, and then after the simulation was over, she'd be giving me feedback, and then I'd be able to reflect and try it again. But we're not going to do all of that. We don't have the facilitator here, but you'll get the idea, okay? So in this case, the facilitator would be reading this to the trainee. So you are the manager of the department. You are preparing for a very important meeting with your boss, which is scheduled in 15 minutes, so you have a very short amount of time. One of the employees who reports to one of your direct reports enters the office. So I'm getting ready for a big meeting. This is me.
I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to you right now. I cannot believe this just happened. George, you completely humiliated me in front of the entire staff. I cannot put up with this. I will not put up with this. I need you to do something, and I need you to do something right now.
Whoa, David, you're obviously very upset, but look, here's the deal. I have a meeting in 15 minutes with my boss, and I'm actually quite not ready for it, so we're going to have to just deal with this.
I don't think that you are actually going to really even do anything about this. I don't believe anything that you're telling me. Fine. You know what?
Yeah,
if you're not going to take care of this, I'll take care of this myself.
No, David.
I'm going to go see my lawyer.
No, David, honestly, no, we can do it later. Honestly, can you just sit down? Just sit down. We can talk about this. David, one more minute. You know what? Let's make a point of talking later, all right? Okay, that didn't work out so well. Okay, he's going to get a lawyer. So now the facilitator would say, gee, what did you do or not do in order to get that response? So now what we'd try to do is have him try it again and say, all right, think about all of those things and let's try it one more time. Okay? Ready, John?
I need to talk to you, and I need to talk to you right now. I cannot believe this just happened. George, you completely humiliated me in front of the entire staff. I cannot put up with this. I will not put up with this. I need you to do something, and I need you to do something right now.
David, look, you're obviously very upset, and I'm sorry that this happened to you. Here's the deal. I have a meeting that I have to get to, but this is really important to me. So this is what I'm going to tell you. What we're going to do is we're going to meet at noontime. Okay, I have a
No,
meeting.
I don't really care about your meeting, okay? I mean, this is either important to you or it's not. You know?
But it is important to me
hey,
too.
How about I just go to the meeting with you? Now, I got a couple of things to say to the folks up there upstairs as well.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's not going to work. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to calm down. We're going to have a conversation about this. This is very important to me. You are important to me. What we're going to do is we're going to meet at noon. My meeting will be over. You're going to have my undivided attention, and we're going to make this happen. You and I are going to have a conversation at noon. Does that work for you? What do you think?
Fine. You know, I don't think that you are actually going to really even do anything about this.
No, I am.
I don't believe anything that you're telling me. Fine. You know what?
David?
If you're not going to take care of this, I'll take care of this myself, right?
David?
I'm going to go see my lawyer.
David, please. Please, will you please sit down? This is really important. I want to hear it. I want to hear you. Please sit down. Come back. Sit down, David. All right? Just calm down. Have a seat. All right. Let's do this. I am putting this on my calendar, noontime. Can we meet? We can talk about it. We'll take care of this situation. Does that work for you?
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Do I have your word on this?
Absolutely. 12 o'clock on my calendar. You'll be here. I'll be here. We'll deal with it then. I promise you. Okay? All right. Thank you. Okay. So that's how it works. All right? And we give people the sense of accomplishment because they're like, okay, didn't go so well the first time. I did some things differently the second time. This stuff really works. So that's really what we do and how we do it. David, do you want to?
Just to say that didn't realize that there's probably all sorts of people from the state of New Hampshire probably look at me a little funny if they go off on that. So I've never. This is the first time I've seen actually. You know, we do the filming and then we collaborate with some other people that actually do the filming and the editing. So it's really kind of cool to see it. Although there's another one I'm even worse. Where it's a scenario.
That one's rated R.
Yeah, that's a scenario with I work in the company and my wife has shown up at the company and I've obviously been having some extracurricular activity along the side and it turns into a big horrible fight with lots of very colorful language. And
So in that case, the manager has to deal with it, but then they also call the police because she's really like threatening to kill him. So there's a point where she's reaching in her purse and the law enforcement person has to say, step away, put your purse down, all of that stuff. So all kinds of scenarios that we're using, not only obviously from conflict management skills, but leadership, all of that, law enforcement, et cetera. But any questions? No? Yes, ma'am.
Who's prompting the responses?
It's on the.
You're making decisions based on.
On the fly, I have a number of options depending on, in this case, what Elaine had to say. I can take it to where she's leading it.
That was a spreadsheet that you showed us earlier.
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't look like that in there. Some of the kludginess that we've been dealing with when we're using this law enforcement software, the use of force, there's basically 3 or 4 options when you're dealing with law enforcement. You've got the perpetrator either complies, they use pepper spray, taser, or firearm. So those are basically 4 branches. With the human psyche in a conflict situation, it could go anywhere. So what happens is we're trying to take something that's designed for 4 branches, and now we have like 30 branches. So the software gets a little funky and it's just harder to work with. But we're making it work, and we're getting better at it as we're building them to say, oh, okay, saying this gives us a lot more flexibility and that sort of thing. So we're able to, I want to say, massage it a little bit. But we would like to, we're actually been in conversation with the company about helping us, the company that makes the software, to help us make the software that would be more user-friendly for this kind of scenario rather than the law enforcement. So, and they're starting now to use it for first responders, fire, and they're calling it, instead of Milo range, which is what this is, they're calling it Milo response. And it's not the use of force, it's more like a fire or an ambulance person coming into a home where some domestic violence might have taken place or a drug overdose, and it's more interaction. So they're starting to move in that direction, so we're hoping that the software kind of follows that. So.
And when we do the live, I mean, in some cases, the facilitator, if I'm the facilitator, I kind of do what John does, except it's on the spot. So, for instance, one of our first works with PrimeX, we actually did a what we call a trigger scenario. First of all, so we got a chance to see a scene play out that I could stop the action at any point in time and have an interaction with the audience. The one that we did, I think, was you were the it was sort of a town manager, and you had two department heads. I think one was sort of the building and grounds, and the other was. I can't remember what the other one was.
Cemeteries. One was a school. It was a facility guy, and then a cemetery.
Right.
Yeah. So two people that work outdoors, but don't necessarily work together.
And one manager was rather lax and had the sort of easygoing, and the other one was very, very strict with his workers. And basically, the workers under them were, the one that was kind of strict. His workers were complaining because they were looking around and seeing all the other workers like hanging out and having a good time and not really getting work done. And this had kind of come to a head between these two department heads, and the manager had to sort of basically figure out how to basically get everybody on the same page. So when that scene plays out, which we kind of have two ways of doing it. We do what we call a rehearsed improvisation. As I say, we know the scenario, we know the major points that we want to make, but we don't script it. And one of the things about that is it really keeps it very authentic and it stays in this somewhat improvisational format. But our other versions, which allows us actually to be much more subtle, and sometimes subtle is far more authentic. Oftentimes, like if you're at a department meeting, people aren't necessarily all flying off the handle. Actually, most things are rather calm, cool, and collective, and the real sort of problems and aggressions live under the surface. Those we really have to script in order to get the tone just right. At that point, our actors are doing a combination of scripted version, which I stop, and then we go into an improvisation with the audience, and then we can pick back up with scripted until we get to the end of the piece.
Yeah. We talked about this on the phone a few weeks ago, but how will you start to measure efficacy of the techniques, both I think from your perspective as well as for the clients that you're using the techniques with?
It's hard with this style. It is always hard because it's funny. I had to take the defensive driving course because if you're going to drive a UNH vehicle, you must have the defensive driving license. And I had to kind of laugh at it because it's an online thing, and it's sort of kind of what we were talking about. It goes through, it kind of whips through all this stuff and then says, "Wow, look, in this session you learned this, 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 and this." Thumbs up. And I was like, I didn't learn that. Say I did, but I guess if I have to fill it on a form, you said it. So I guess that means I learned it. I learned some terms and some definitions. I didn't really learn anything because that's really easy to measure, right? Here's a definition. You either know the definition or you don't. And that's right standpoint. And if that's what we're going to use as a measure, that's clear. This work, because some of it might say, to a degree, is a little bit slow burn as well. A lot of times you experience it, but it might be 1, 2, 3 weeks later before the realizations actually come to you, or behaviors are different based upon the work that you did. So it's much, much more difficult, I think, to try to gauge that. Nonetheless, we do indeed do survey work. So certainly with the stuff at UNH, everything that we've done with Advance, because it's a federal grant, so we really have to show some sort of evidence of the impact. And so far, the results are pretty astounding. What people feel like they're coming away with, the value of it, the objective of it, which is to self-reflect and become more aware. These are things that we consistently score very, very high on. And I think I want to kind of say something about awareness, because that's, I think, more than anything else, what it's about. I was talking a little bit about culture and character, and how, in this essence, we don't necessarily think about how we got to who we are right now, because it's happened over such a long period of time, and it lives under your subconscious. And it's only really under certain circumstances that we're forced to kind of reflect and think about it. And ultimately, that's what these simulations are trying to do, is say, try to become more aware of what you do, because you really can't alter the behaviors unless you're aware of your behaviors first. And that's really what it tries to do. It tries to put you in a situation where you actually have to think about what do I do? Even in our simulations where we don't do the one-on-one like you just saw there, but the audience gets to sit in an audience and it's kind of safe. And they're watching the academic department meeting happen in front of them. Hopefully what's happening, and again, we are seeing evidence this in the surveys, is that people really are saying, when I'm chairing a meeting, I do that. Or, oh, I know this person, and this person because they live in my department. Mm-hmm. And I can see exactly how I would be reacting under those circumstances, and I can see how that is not going to get us where we need to go if we want to facilitate change. So it kind of goes back to that idea that it's tough because we're trying to be very, very specific. For instance, several of our simulations, they take place in an engineering department. And we really had to make sure that we portrayed that engineering department very specifically, even though maybe only 20% of our audience have anything to do with an engineering department. And it's not so much that we want to be really accurate, because for the 20% of the engineers, we want to make sure that if they quiz us on robotics, we can answer correctly, which is pretty amazing. We do pretty well with that kind of stuff, although we try to stay away from it. But it's because we find that the more specific we get with the department, the more universal we get actually with what happens between these human beings. And so we spend a lot of time just developing these characters, developing these relationships, and really understanding the microcosm that they function in.
And also from we would love to have some research. We had done some partnering with Granite State College. They have a conflict management class, and they were running it last term, and they had 2 sessions running at the same time by the same instructor. And what we decided to do, even though it wasn't an official experiment, we had one section go through the way the normal class does, all of the rest of the stuff that she normally does. And the other section had 4 of these over the course of the 12-week course to give them the opportunity to practice their conflict resolution skills. And truly what we saw, and Jonathan was with me, the very first day, so I think it was week 2 that we did this, and it was this one, this particular simulation. Some of the people had some business. Granite State College is adult learners for the most part. So they had some experience with business settings and stuff like that. So some of them, they had a little bit of confidence going into it. There was one young lady who was more of a traditional age student. She started to cry. So we stopped the simulation because she just didn't know what to do. It was so realistic to her that she froze and she started to cry. So they, the facilitator, the instructor, talked her through it and said, okay, let's just try it again. What would you say? What would you say? And walked her through it. So then 2 weeks later, we come back with a different scenario. And she comes in and she's still a little mousy, and she's doing it. And some people are getting a little bit more confident, but she was still kind of uneasy, let's just say. By the 4th time we did this, so it was like week 11, she literally, her countenance changed. I mean, I can't tell you, seeing her 12 weeks earlier, she walked into the room, sat down, and she had this attitude like, bring it. And then anecdotally, after I said, to the instructor, I said, tell us, the class that had the simulations did far better on their final projects than the other one. She goes, and I felt so bad for the other sessions because I wanted them to have it. So even though it wasn't an official research project, we have that anecdotal thing. But if anybody's interested in doing some research for it, we'd love to have that research. Come out, we'd love to work with you. So we don't have anything yet. That's something that obviously my trustees at PrimeX are going to want to know. We've spent some money on this technology, so they're going to want to see that evidence. But I think going forward, we've seen it anecdotally and in those evals and stuff, but we'd love to have research done on it for sure. So,
We know good research.
yeah. That's,
So it's 5:40, so why don't we walk through that door, the lights will come on, I promise we won't have to heat break in the dark. Continue the conversation out there, but could you please help me thank our speakers today?